6G speeds hit 100 gigabits in a new test, 500 times faster than the average 5G cell phone. Scientists in Japan have successfully transferred data at speeds of 100 gigabit per second using high-frequency wavelength bands over a distance of 330 feet for the first time reported on April 24th, 2024. I'm Ron Brown with Tech for Senior, where we make videos to help seniors understand technology and to bring them up to date on 5G technology. So before we get into 5G technology in 2024, I'd like to go back and look at some history. Now, this is a slide of course, Don Johnson in Miami Vice. For all those seniors, you all know about this show. This is one of our favorite shows. If you're under the age of 50, you've probably never heard of this. Well, here you see Don Johnson, and what is most important is look at the cell phone he has. This is a 1G cell phone, and of course, Don being a smart guy, he had one of the first cell phones available. I actually had a 1G cell phone, and it was really terrible. It was like a party line. I don't know if you remember, but someone might be phoning and get in on your line, and you'd say, "Get off my line." It was an old analog system. It wasn't digital. Well, we moved quickly into 2G, which of course was digital communication. About this time, the US federal government realized that cell phone technology was going to be a big deal, really big. So they decided to break up Ma Bell instead of having a great monopoly for all the cell phone services in the United States. So as the breakup occurred, there was a tiny little company in Seattle called Verizon. And in the breakup, they were given a large chunk of Ma Bell, and the federal government said, "Go forth and multiply." And they did. And of course, that is history. So when Verizon got their marching orders to go forth and multiply, the board sat down and wanted to build a large network with the best equipment they could. And they looked at all available types of networks, and they chose CDMA as a standard. Well, of course, T-Mobile and AT&T had different ideas, and they chose another standard called GSM. Now, this is exactly the same thing that happened with, now again, you have to be a senior to understand this, was with VHS and Betamax. As you remember, those of us who really did our research went with Betamax because Betamax was a better technology. Well, what happened? Well, the world went with VHS and Betamax went away. Well, similar thing happened with the CDMA and GSM. The rest of the world went with the GSM standard. So in the United States, while we had these 3G networks, we had two standards. We have, of course, the CDMA system, and we had the GSM. Well, that's why, of course, the Verizon phones wouldn't work on the T-Mobile service, and T-Mobile wouldn't work on the Verizon service. And of course, they kept giving us free phones to keep on those services. So it was a bit of a crazy system for a while. And then a man by the name of Steve Jobs came along and created something that would change the world as we know it today. And that, of course, was the iPhone. And he had a concept that the phone would be connected to the internet, and it would be quite an amazing device. And the iPhone, of course, was created and became enormously successful. Well, the 3G networks just weren't going to cut it as far as providing high-speed internet for those phones. So, of course, we developed yet a 4G standard, which moved ahead. And fortunately, 4G, hey, all the phones worked on this. We got rid of the old double standard, and we had one now that all phones would work on the 4G network. And there we were for a number of years until, of course, this 5G came. And today we're going to talk about what is this 5G thing, why is it important, and what does this where are we going with this in 2024? All right, let's talk a little bit about the history of 5G networks. Then we'll talk about how they work and the advantages of 5G. Now, we have to go back to the year 2018, and this is when we first saw 5G networks appear in Canada, the United States, and around the world. And this was led by a company who is by far the leader in this technology called Huawei. And they were by far way ahead of everybody else in the development of this, which of course was a Chinese company. And it meant that China was very well developed in their 5G network long before Canada, the United States, Britain, so on and so forth, had their networks up and running. So in 2018, we started to see very early signs that we were going to be switching from 4G to 5G, and some of the cellular companies started to implement these changes. Now, the problem arose with the Five Eyes countries. This would be, of course, Great Britain, Canada, the United States, New Zealand, and Australia. The concern was, of course, if they were going to put your national network and spent hundreds of billions of dollars building this, and it was all controlled by Huawei, would this pose a security risk? And the answer to that, of course, was yes. So the first thing that happened in 2018 was Australia and New Zealand banned Huawei systems from being implemented. In 2019, the United States then banned Huawei, followed by Great Britain and Canada. This was very significant because that meant that companies that had actually started to implement in 2018 some of these very expensive networks had to actually, in the United States and Canada, take them out. So this became very costly. And the other big technical problem was Huawei was so advanced from all the other companies making this type of equipment, it would take a number of years for the other companies to catch up. So that led to a big delay in the implementation of 5G networks in the Five Eyes countries. So today we see the well-developed 5G networks in China, Southeast Asia, and India. These are the powerhouses of manufacturing and new developments. And they, of course, all use Huawei equipment. So yes, it is taking the Five Eyes countries a little while to catch up and to wait for companies like Nokia and other 5G manufacturers to develop the technology that Huawei has. And you'll see how this becomes apparent when we go over how 5G works. So let me talk a little bit about the advantages and why we need 5G. All right, let's focus on 5G. Now, we all know that, of course, 5G is faster than 4G. But how much faster is it? Well, let's look at this diagram here, and you'll see if we took a 2-hour movie called Guardians of the Galaxy, and we downloaded that on a 3G network, it would take 26 hours. If we did that on a 4G network, it would take 6 minutes. And if we did it on a 5G network, it would take 3.6 seconds. Boy, I wonder, that's going at 10 gigabits per second download. I wonder how that 6G network we discussed earlier at 100 gigabits per second, I bet you it'd be a fraction of a second. So you're probably wondering, why do we need such speed? I mean, we can't download our email any faster, right? So why is speed important? And speed is important because of low latency. In this diagram, you'll see pictures of autonomous driving cars. And you'll see, of course, they have a perimeter sensor around the outside so that they can stay in the lane and stay safe. Well, the ability to control those cars is so important that you have a rapid 5G network with low latency. You can't sort of be thinking about stepping on the brakes before it actually happens. Or let's look at healthcare. As doctors do remote surgery, this is a neurosurgeon doing neurosurgery with haptic technology, again, requiring a very, very low latency before he makes that critical scalpel cut. And then, of course, there's manufacturing. This is the big one. Manufacturing really depends on low latency. As they tool up their factories and they run the automated processes, a low latency speed is extremely important. But let's look at this article. It was out this morning in the newspaper. This is a Washington College football team who relies on 5G technology, the Bisons. They come from a university where a lot of the students are hearing impaired, and they use technology in their helmets to get the clues from the coach. Yes, 5G is making them very successful. So not only does it have implications on what we discussed before, but big implications for sports as well. So whether it's in the automobile industry, healthcare, manufacturing, or sports, 5G technology gives everyone a competitive edge. And in times where the United States and Canada are hoping to bring back some of their manufacturing capability, which we have seen move off to China, Southeast Asia, and India, who all have well-developed 5G systems and are moving on to 6G. It is so important that we develop these 5G systems to stay competitive. All right, let's talk a little bit about what 5G is. Now, I think that it's important that you understand that this is an evolving technology that is going to take maybe the next 10 years to give you speeds of up to 20 gigabit download. Now, you've already seen that 6G technology is available in Japan. They're just working on their 6G technology, which gives you download speeds of 100 gigabits per second. So when we look at this 5G diagram here, you'll see that there's 3 layers of the cake. And today we're going to focus on the top layer, which is the very fast millimeter wave. What is the millimeter wave? I'm going to explain that. But what you need to understand is that the parts of this cake change depending on where you are and where you live in the United States and Canada. It's very dynamic and is always related to the new technology and new antennas that are being developed by the various companies that are providing the services for this 5G network. All right, let's look at the diagram on the bottom right here, and you'll see that the 4G network uses around 6 gigahertz. This is a great frequency. It allows a good penetration to buildings and allows great reception, which we have with our 4G network. Why would anybody want to go into the higher spectrum, 24 gigahertz and above, into what we call the millimeter wave? These are terrible wavelengths because, of course, they are very fast, but they don't go very far and they don't penetrate buildings. And the rain and the fog all affects them. But the higher frequency means that there's lots of these around, and we can create these lots of them, and they go very fast. So in the past, we've never wanted to use these higher frequencies for communication because of the unreliability nature of them. But I'm going to show you how that all changed, and this is where we get the 5G technology from. Because this is really an issue of we've got to make what we have better. We can't create any more radio frequencies. We have to take the ones we have and make better use of them. So let's see how we can do this. Now, this technology is constantly changing, but we're going to talk first about millimeter waves, which we have. We're going to talk about small cell antennas. Then we're going to go to the massive MIMO, multiple in, multiple out antennas. What are beam-forming antennas? And we're going to talk about full duplex. So let's have a look at that. All right, let's look at what we're going to call small cell antennas with 5G network. Now, these are typically antennas that you will see in residential areas. Since I've told you that these don't go very far and can't penetrate through buildings, you're going to need a lot of these aerials in residential areas. Now let's look at this diagram here, And this is to do with home internet services, which you see being released now by the big three. This is where you'll have a tower and you'll have an antenna on your own home. Now this will have to be line of sight, and it can't actually go very far. So you'll have to have lots of these towers, but the signal will go from the tower to the antenna on your house. Then there'll be a cable that will take you to a modem in your house, and then of course it will connect to a router and Wi-Fi and however you want to distribute it. But that's how you're going to get this to your house from the tower. Now as this technology moves into residential areas, you'll need to have a lot of these towers, and here's some examples of towers on lighting standards in different locations. And you'll see the light on the top, and you'll see the antennas on the lighting standards. Now you'll probably need these aerials every second or third light in the area that you live. So yes, there's going to be a lot of towers to have this 5G technology to be useful in your neighborhood. Now obviously, if we're in a downtown situation where there's a lot of tall buildings, the technology needs to change. And that's where we have what we call massive MIMO. And this means multiple in, multiple out. In other words, we can create large numbers of these high frequency 5G signals. And in this diagram, you can see the different aerials that would be sending out a lot of these 5G millimeter wave signals. Now the problem is we're sending out so many because we have to cover all the sides of the building. So we're just going to flood the area with a lot of these signals. Problem is these signals are going to collide, and they're going to go boom, boom, and it's going to reduce the speed because of the massive collisions. So we then have a second type of aerial called a beamforming aerial. And this really is like a control tower at an airport. It's going to direct these signals so that it becomes a logical way in which we can receive them and keep the speed up. So we're going to have, in conjunction with MIMO aerials, we'll have beamforming aerials, and you can see that in this diagram. And if you are downtown Phoenix and you're looking up, you'll see these different types of aerials on a lot of buildings in order to get that type of service. Now the last technology is duplex technology. Now if you have the old walkie-talkies we used to have as kids, you can remember if I was broadcasting when you were broadcasting and we pushed the transmission button at the same time, it would go squeak, squawk, squawk, and it wouldn't work because we both know that we have to say over, and then you can broadcast, then I can broadcast. So you can't actually run a signal in different directions on the same frequency. One person can broadcast or the other person can broadcast. Now you're going to say, well, Ron, how do cell phones work? That isn't the problem. We don't have to say over on cell phones. That's because we have different channels on cell phones. In fact, when we're talking on a cell phone, there's a receiving channel and a sending channel. So we are using different frequencies. So we have two frequencies every time we're talking on a cell phone. Well, that of course uses up a lot of the frequencies available. Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually have a sending and receiving frequency on the same track? Well, in this diagram, you'll see, of course, there's, as the old system, two trains going on the same track, on different tracks, and that's how we make it work. With what the engineers have figured out with duplex is that we can now send and receive on the same frequency, which is really quite incredible. And this will allow, again, double the number of transmissions that we can make and make this thing even faster. So these are the technologies that we have today to make this 5G system work. But as I speak, I'm sure there's more and more of these types of technology being developed, which will all be added to make these systems better so that we will be able to get up to about 20 gigabit download. So in summary, the 5G networks in Canada and the United States are composed of this type of graph you'll see here. This cake is a pictorial view of the different frequencies used to make up this network. Now, this will vary dynamically where you live, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But you'll see the broad 4G base, then we have the mid-range, and of course, the very high millimeter waves, which is a small group of geographical locations. So this will change. Now, why is this important? If you look at Arizona, Arizona is, of course, massive development going there with chip manufacturing and the new, of course, CHIP Act that has just been passed in the United States. So there's a lot of money pouring in. So you would think that they would have a very advanced 5G network to drive this system. So I sent our music director, Ray Baxter, out to do some testing for me. Now, it's very interesting. Ray lives in a very rural area in Pine, Arizona. He recently changed his cellular service to T-Mobile. And the reason he did that is because of this graph here. You'll see that he has his home connection is now just under 500 megabytes right to the cell tower. Now, Ray has already asked T-Mobile if they have a home internet service, and they don't, but it's coming. So Ray is checking regularly to see when the home internet service is going to be available. Now, when Ray was last in Phoenix about 3 weeks ago, he was at a Denny's downtown, and his T-Mobile connection on his Samsung flip phone was 1 gigabit down, as you see in this diagram. So yes, Arizona has put in place a very advanced 5G network so that it would support, of course, these new chip manufacturing plants. So in summary, I have a few final comments. The first comment is that there are roughly 1 million cell towers in the United States. Now, the average cost of upgrading a 4G tower to a 5G tower is about $1 million. So I want all you people who are good at math to multiply 1 million times 1 million and tell me how much money that is. And when you do that, you'll find out it is a lot of money. So where's the money going to come to build these advanced 5G networks? Well, the answer is you. You're going to be paying for it. But this is to your advantage right now. And I keep talking about this because the big three are desperate to get you to convert over to their 5G system. And the reason for that is they need some cash to pay for the ongoing development of these advanced 5G systems. And they're going to offer you great deals to get you to switch over to their 5G home internet. They're going to bundle this with your home phone if you have one, your cell phones, and also your internet. And I don't know what to raise T-Mobile price will be out, but Verizon is often offering this for around $50 a month. There are some great deals, and this is where the big savings is going to be in your telecommunication package. You should look for this because there are big savings in this area. Again, it may not be immediately available in your area, but this is rapidly changing, so you need to keep checking back and looking and reevaluating your system because there's some big money that you can save. All right, it's Ron Brown with Tech for Senior. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video on 5G technology. Till we see you again, have a great day and stay safe.
Fun facts you may not know about your Apple Mac. Hi, I'm Bill James with Tech for Seniors.
With so many people tapping away on their computers these days, it's sometimes fun to take a look behind the scenes at our favorite devices, such as the Apple Mac. While the Mac seems like a modern piece of kit, it's actually been around in one form or another for about 50 years. Apple began selling home computers in the mid-1970s, only a few years after the moon landing. Of course, things didn't remain static. Apple grew into the worldwide brand that we know and love today, and has improved its products over time. However, despite their long history, many users still don't know all the little details about their devices. OS X isn't said how you think it's said. If you think you pronounce OS X as OS X, then we have bad news for you. That's the wrong pronunciation. It's actually said OS X, because of the fact that it is the 10th operating system developed by the firm. X is just a Roman numeral that means 10, which could be part of the confusion.
Before OS X, Mac had OS versions running from 1 to 9. So the fact that OS X would be called OS X actually makes a lot of sense.
It just doesn't look very good when written down.
If you're still not convinced, you can actually get your Mac to say OS X aloud in the terminal app.
You just type, say OS X, and it'll spit back the correct pronunciation for you. The first portable Mac weighed 16 pounds. Can you imagine lugging around a portable computer that weighs the same as a year-old child? It sounds ridiculous from today's perspective. Most laptops weigh between 2 and 3 pounds. However, back then people actually considered it lightweight. The heaviest MacBook currently on the market is the Pro 15-inch with the Retina display. At around 4 pounds, it is still substantially lighter than the original technology. As you might expect, the Mac Portable was a flop. Apple revised it and then released the PowerBook series, which was much more competitive.
Before Yosemite and El Capitan, Apple codenamed its OS X versions according to big cats.
The first of these was the cheetah, followed by the puma, tiger, snow leopard, mountain lion, and others. Apple recently made a switch from big cats to national park code names. Because of the fact that Apple is located in California, developers then changed the code names for new versions after landmarks in the state. The move was not welcomed by many Apple purists. Microsoft Multiplan was the first Microsoft product on Mac. Apple originally wanted to keep its products completely separate from Microsoft and the rest of the computing ecosystem, but that proved impossible. The Bill Gates-run firm was just so dominant that they had to make some compromises. One of those was to allow the use of Microsoft Multiplan, a spreadsheet program, from 1982 onwards. Apple then permitted users to access Excel in 1987 after Microsoft changed and updated its spreadsheet software.
OS X offers an inbuilt therapist you can use at any time.
When you have an Apple Mac, you won't need to drive to a shrink's office and lie on your back. To access, open your terminal app, type Emacs, followed by Shift plus Escape, press X, type Doctor, and hit Enter. After you do this, a virtual therapist will enter the room, ready to answer all your questions. Of course, because you're talking to a machine, it often feels like you're conversing with a brainless automaton. But that doesn't stop it from feeling quite fun. Apple supplied the original Mac keyboard with some of its buttons missing. Can you imagine using a keyboard with no arrow keys? Well, that's precisely what Apple demanded of its early users. While the PC platform had arrow keys, Apple didn't. Naturally, they corrected this mistake, and we all forgot about it. After all, Macs are easier to use than PCs, right? Weird timestamps on your downloaded files are an Easter egg. Steve Jobs liked to give Apple Mac users Easter eggs on their devices, fun little quirks that don't obey all the usual rules and patterns, and one of them relates to downloads. Have you ever noticed weird-looking created and modified timestamps on half-downloaded files or files you canceled? If you go into the file browser via Finder, you'll see the date, Tuesday the 24th of January 1984 at 1:30 p.m. What the heck does that mean? Well, it just so happens to be the date and time that Steve Jobs unveiled the first Macintosh in history. Macs couldn't multitask until 1987. Today, we take it for granted that we can open 100 tabs in our browser, play video games, and do word processing at the same time. But back in the 1980s, you couldn't multitask at all on a Mac. You had to do things sequentially. That changed in 1987 with the release of the Aqua windowed interface, which launched in response to new products coming out of Microsoft. Steve Jobs wanted the original Mac to have just 128 kilobytes of memory. These days, most Macs have 8 gigabytes of RAM. But back in 1984, Steve Jobs wanted his original machine to have just 128 kilobytes, which was next to nothing, even back then. The reason for this was the shape of the enclosure. Jobs wanted it to be smaller and with less RAM it could be. Steve Jobs and the team autographed every original Mac. Imagine buying a PC with Bill Gates' original signature on it. It sounds unlikely, and it never happened. However, that's not true of Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and the team. They actually signed all the first-generation Macs they sold individually. In summary, the Apple Mac has a rich history. While the device is popular today, it also has deep roots. Apple won our hearts over the course of decades, way before social media was a thing. This presentation was on a collaborative post used with permission from Glitz and Glam by Tiff. I'm Bill James with Tech for Seniors. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to the quantum realm, where the rules of the game are, well, let's just say they're not your grandma's checkers. Quantum computing is like stepping into a sci-fi movie, except it's real. And it doesn't require popcorn, though popcorn never hurts. The quirky quantum basics. First off, quantum computing is all about qubits. Think of them as the chameleons of the computing world. Unlike regular bits that are as predictable as two-option menu 0 or 1, qubits can be in a superposition, which is a fancy way of saying they can be both at the same time. It's like if Schrödinger's cat learned to code. Potential applications. The quantum wish list. Quantum computing has a wish list that would make even Santa jealous. For starters, it could revolutionize cryptography, making your data as secure as Fort Knox. Then there's optimization, where quantum computers could solve puzzles faster than a toddler can dismantle your living room. And let's not forget about AI and machine learning. Quantum computing could boost their brains to Einstein levels. Challenges, quantum headaches, but it's not all quantum rainbows and butterflies. Building a practical quantum computer is tougher than convincing a cat to take a bath. Qubits are sensitive little things that get all flustered by noise and errors. And scaling them up, that's like trying to organize a party for cats. Hurting them is just the beginning. Quantum computing, the future or just hype? Well, it's a bit of both. It's like the hoverboard of the computing world. It sounds cool and we really want it to work, but we're not quite there yet. Researchers are on it though, working hard to turn this quantum dream into a reality. In conclusion, quantum computing is a wild ride through the laws of physics, with the potential to change the world as we know it. It's got its challenges, but hey, what's a little quantum turbulence on the way to the future? Stay safe, stay secure, and keep your eyes peeled on your qubits twirling. Quantum computing is coming to a reality near you. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, and thanks for watching and listening.
Well, thanks, Bob. I'm going to buy one. Where do I get it?
You gotta wait a while.
Darn it. All right. Ray's away, but he did send I do have his outro for us, so let's see what he has to say.